right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Karis Circle. Karis Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books. And Karis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are also, of course, Agnes Scott College's school store, and we are very happy and honored to be here today, officially co-sponsored by the ASC Center for Digital and Visual Literacy. This event would not be possible without our friend Anastasia, who is right here. Woo woo. Anastasia very kindly was like, yes, let's do this thing. When many months ago we first brought up this idea. We love the joy of collaboration and getting to work with students and faculty and staff. So that's always a really exciting thing. It's really great to get to bring a younger person to campus who is already on their way in the world, and to speak to a undergraduate who is on a similar path. So first, I'm actually going to introduce our interviewer, who is Kennedi Malone. Kennedi is a third-year undergraduate student at Agnes Scott College, pursuing a degree in anthropology with a minor in public health. Her deep concern for cherishing the lived experiences of community knowledge makers, neighbors, strangers, ourselves, finds its home in her anthropological coursework, as well as her role as a program innovation and education intern at Justice for Black Girls, in which she co-creates Black Girlhood Studies curricula. In addition to expanding global knowledge concerning the nuances of Black girlhood at national and international conferences, Kennedi engages in Black feminist praxis by serving as the co-founder and co-director of Beads for Our Bodies, a small feminist jewelry collective that supports reproductive justice efforts in the Atlanta area. So everybody give it up for Kennedi. Kennedi, you were the first person that my coworker Dartricia thought of when we were thinking of a student. She was like, I just met this bomb-ass person who's doing amazing work in the community. So I'm so glad that you could be here to do this. And we're joined by LaKia Williams. LaKia is a reproductive justice organizer, digital creator, and independent podcast host of the reproductive justice podcast, Black Feminist Rants. LaKia created Black Feminist Rants in 2020 as an outlet to discuss pressing issues in the Black liberation, Black feminist, and reproductive justice movements. In addition to her work as a podcaster and storyteller, LaKia is a proud supporter of abortion funds. She currently serves as the Board of Directors Vice Chair for ACCESS Reproductive Justice, California's stateside abortion fund. She is also the project manager of a traveling self-managed abortion exhibit with the Abortion on Our Own Terms campaign. LaKia's creative and professional endeavors are in the pursuit of liberation and joy for Black women, girls, and people. LaKia Williams was awarded Newcomb Institute's 30 Under 30 Award for her work in the reproductive justice and abortion access movement. So please give it up for LaKia Williams. And we're very honored to always work with folks who are working in the reproductive justice and abortion access space. I want to let folks know, just in case you don't, that Karis is a Plan B outpost. What that means is ARC Reproductive Justice Southeast gives Plan B kits to Karis for free. So if you or anyone you know and love needs free Plan B, just come to Karis, get what you need. And we also have free condoms, other kinds of supplies. We also now have Narcan, which is a different kind of harm reduction supply, but all of those things are a part of reproductive justice, right? So this is very much in our wheelhouse, and we're very honored to be here. So we're gonna have a beautiful conversation, and then we're gonna invite you all to ask questions. If you're watching virtually, you can put your questions in the chat. And if you are watching here, I'm gonna bring the mic to you so that we can be sure we get good audio. So without further ado, thank you both so much for being here.
Can y'all hear me? Hello, welcome to the Black Feminist Rants podcast, live and in person. I want to give a very special thank you to Anastasia and Agnes Scott college team, and Percy for bringing me out here for this conversation. Thank you to Kennedi for joining me. Thank you to Karis Bookstores and ER for being just so gung-ho and excited to have us out here. And I didn't know y'all were a Plan B outpost, so I just want to give a round of applause to that. Being a resource in the community. I got my start in reproductive justice doing Plan B resource outreach to the community, so definitely feel connected to that. So I'm super happy to be here and to be in discussion with you all. As you all heard, Kennedi is a rock star, an activist, a scholar, a Black woman who's doing all the things. So I'm super excited to be in conversation with you. And to start us off, to kick off this episode, I'd love for you to share a piece of your reproductive justice story or your connection to the reproductive justice movement.
Oh my gosh, that's such a great question. When my first introduction to reproductive justice was actually during my Agnes Scott legacy experience, because there was this video with, oh, I feel so disrespectful, but with the critical founder of the reproductive justice framework, who was an Agnes Scott alum.
Loretta Ross.
Yes,
okay,
thank you.
Listen
Lorraine
to
Ross.
episode 2 of Black Feminist Rants to learn more about Loretta Ross.
And hearing the articulation of the reproductive justice framework, I was like, this makes so much sense. And I love the way it kind of went past this sort of we want a codified right to abortion, to really think about life ways and the ways that we can be humans. And then that had kind of always resonated with how I thought about life and what it means to go on a reproductive journey. But then to have that language was really, really helpful. And then, of course, it was a tool when all of the stuff went down, with Texas and then Georgia and then the 6-week heartbeat bill and all that stuff.
Definitely amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I also have a similar story in learning about Loretta Ross and kind of the really thoughtfulness that those Black women had when they created the reproductive justice movement and creating a space for them that didn't exist prior. I really felt connected to that, and that's why I found my home in the reproductive justice movement. So I'm glad that we share that connection. So speaking a little bit more to you and your brilliance, I love that you combine scholarship with your organizing and your connection to the Black feminist movement and the reproductive justice movement. So I'd love for you to talk about your work with autoethnography and how you just research and study Black girlhood through autoethnography.
Mm-hmm. So my first introduction to autoethnography was through anthropology. So I was familiar with ethnography as this method where you do this deep collaboration with a community and do this sort of what we call thick description of their life ways and the ways that they make sense of the world. And then my introduction to autoethnography was similar, but now we're thinking about how do we use our subjectivity and our person as the focus of our research to understand these larger systems or these larger systematic processes. And I thought that was fabulous because there's such stigma is not the word I'm looking for, but I'll go with it. There's such a stigma on objectivity and removing yourself from any sort of inquiry that should have academic merit. And so then being invited into this practice of centering yourself and engaging with this consideration of how you show up in this topic and not shying away from that, one, felt fabulous because it goes against the status quo. Two, it is so important for a person who embodies Blackness and who lives in a Black body, because there is hardly ever an invitation to use ourselves and our experience as the point of reference and as the credible evidence. Always there is this sort of call to go outside of ourselves and explain what we know, or explain what we know embodied through embodied knowledge with this outside source or with this outside understanding of a thing. And to not have to do that, to not have to go any further than your living room or your kitchen or your grandparents' house, just felt so wonderful.
I can see you lighting up and glowing as you talk about it. I love that you shared that specifically because I feel like there's been this disconnect between scholarship and research and actual organizing, because in organizing, we always talk about why it's so important to center people's lived experience, and that should be the basis and the start of everything. And then, like you said, you get into scholarship and research, and it's you have to be unbiased, you have to be objective, and you have to separate yourself from it. But if we are centering the people who have the experience and we want them to lead the movements, they have to bring their experience into it, right? And research can be a form of activism, so they have to be included in that as well. So I love that you're kind of connecting those two, and you're like bridging it for me, like that connection between research and scholarship and activism.
And one thing I'll say too, as I'm kind of trying to figure out what I want to do post graduation, the discipline of applied anthropology keeps coming up, and I don't know super much about it, but whenever I think about it, I'm like, I don't know that it's super fair to say, at least for what I want to do, that it's fair to separate applied anthropology as this sort of separate track or this separate discipline, because I never want to use my anthropology just, knowledge for knowledge's sake. Like, I always want to apply it to do something, or to bring life to something, or to recognize the life that is already there. And so I feel like my understanding of research, and I know that it's not everyone's, but my understanding of research and scholarship is always that it should be meant to do exactly the connection that we want.
Right. And can you speak a little bit more to what applied anthropology is? Because I'm like, what?
Yeah, so I think me and you both, but my understanding...
Thank you, I appreciate that.
So my understanding is that applied anthropologists can do their field work in a community, whether it's a community that they're a part of or not, and then use that information to inform the practices of an organization that interacts with that community, or informs policy. So I guess I feel like an example that I was most recently introduced to is if you are an anthropologist for a corporation, and the corporation is trying to figure out how to get employee morale up, you kind of do some field work in the organization and then figure out what are some of the norms, what are processes that go on in the workspace that sort of facilitate that, and then y'all develop a plan together. Apply what you discovered anthropologically to figure out a plan forward. That's as far as my understanding goes.
That makes a lot of sense. Isn't there a study of or there's a certain type of research, it's community-based or community-informed, you know what I'm talking about?
Community-based participatory research,
yes,
and oh my
yes.
gosh, you don't know how bad I want to get trained in that methodology.
Yes. Gotta make that happen.
I know. It makes so much sense to me, because you shouldn't do anything separate from the people that you want to do it for, and I say for in quotes, because doing things for people as a scholar can sort of have this nasty taste, leave a nasty taste in your mouth. But yeah.
One thing that I learned when I was taking an African feminisms course and learning about Black feminism and womanism from an international standpoint was that African feminists were very adamant about not studying people for the sake of studying people, but studying ourselves and being in community. And I feel like that's something that you're really highlighting. And I feel like in Western culture, we become so individualistic and we separate ourselves from what we're doing, whether that's studying or anything. And in a more collective culture, we don't really run into those issues. But because knowledge production is so prioritized in the West, we see our way of studying things as the gold standard when it's not necessarily the best because of imperialism and racism and white supremacy culture.
Totally agree.
It's all connected.
Totally agree.
Unfortunately. And originally, I was going to ask you about how autoethnography can be bridged with storytelling as a means of activism, but I feel like you've just kind of given us that. So I want to save some space in case there's more you want to talk about for that, but I feel like you have addressed that for sure.
I think also, I think the only thing I'll add to is storytelling can be a form of research or can be a form of inquiry, because you can when you work to elicit a story from from a loved one or from a friend, that is a process of what we call building rapport when you're trying to interview a research participant or anything like that. And so I think any conversation that we have, or any internal meditation that we have about ooh, what do I think about this, or ooh, how does this affect me, that can certainly be this introduction to a larger story.
And I love this concept because I was sharing at last night's talk about how storytelling is so important because it helps us in changing the narrative that we hear in media, and narrative changes policy and it changes the culture, and also changing culture is super important. And you do that by meeting people where they're at and sharing their stories. So if we're looking at traditional media and we're hearing all of this misinformation, my focus I like to talk about is abortion. We hear all this misinformation about abortion or all this stigma. Once we have people who have had abortion share their stories, we can combat that stigma and that shame and that misinformation and give people practical ways to engage with the conversation instead of this really scary thing that we see that's framed through misinformation and through stigma and shame. And so I feel like by telling stories, we can get people to see what's actually happening on an individual level so people can make decisions for themselves instead of the powers that be telling us what they think we should hear so that they can have the outcome that they want.
Absolutely.
So that's one way I love like connecting it on a like more individual level.
I totally agree.
Amazing. So talking about abortion access and reproductive justice, I love to transition to you as an entrepreneur and your organization, your jewelry collective. Can you talk more about the work that y'all do?
Yeah, so Beads for Our Bodies is a feminist jewelry collective founded by me and my first year college roommate. And at first, our goal was twofold. We wanted to be like a social justice education space, as well as a jewelry collective that just incubates self-expression sort of as a mechanism for autonomy and a mechanism to like express individual choice. But we've transitioned more into the second, focusing on how we can empower youth specifically through our designs, in like being confident in their self-perception, self-identity, and then also like knowing that the way that they choose to present themselves to the world is this form of choice amidst all the chaos that tries to revoke our choice.
And so how did Beads for Our Bodies begin? What was the origin story to that?
So the Texas abortion ban made my roommate and I both feel like there was like something creeping into Georgia and also just like into the nation that we really were not comfortable with and that we wanted to do something about. And we both had picked up jewelry making as a quarantine hobby. And so we were like, I don't know, actually literally Jill, my co-founder, she came, I was getting dressed or something one morning and she was like, I had an idea. And she's like, what if we made jewelry and sold the profits to people supporting abortions? And I was like, that's an amazing idea. And then she was like, what if we called it Beads for Our Bodies? And I was also like, that's an amazing idea. So like Jill was kind of like, this was her brainchild. And then we worked together to figure out how we wanted to make it happen. And we made the decision early on that we didn't necessarily only want to stay local because like any work to increase access to reproductive justice resources is important, but like we wanted to be local in the idea that like every organization deserves to still stand. And so if there is an organization that maybe has a little bit more funding than another one, let's prioritize like supporting these organizations that like don't have this national recognition and don't have like this don't have a lobbying team, you know?
That's a good point. I feel like there's so much important work happening in the reproductive justice movement by very small, scrappy organizations, grassroots organizations. And of course, all we hear about in the news and the media is like the Planned Parenthoods and the NARAs. And as we know, most abortions happen at clinics that are independent clinics. They don't happen at Planned Parenthoods. Majority of abortions happen at independent clinics. So it's important that we're supporting independent, small organizations and clinics and not just the ones that get all this recognition. Because again, they have a lot of money, and what are they doing with the money? We need to help people on the ground who are also not only advocating for communities, but in the communities that they're advocating for and with.
Absolutely, that part. And I actually didn't know that about the majority of abortions happening at independent clinics. But exactly what you said, this idea of like staying close to community, because just because the name may not be like registered on Instagram or like registered as a place in our head, like that place does such important work. And I think really my proximity to Caris as an Agnes Scott student really helped solidify to me like the importance of knowing what resources you have in your community that can provide you this service or provide you this support, and like making sure that stays open. Because sometimes people have to commute to Planned Parenthood or people have to commute to someplace else. But if there's this place that they may not know about or that I don't know about but literally exists for them, that should always that like route to access should always stay open.
Exactly. I'm on the board of an abortion fund in California, and we have like our monthly reports about who we're servicing, who we're providing abortion funding for. And of course, since Dobbs, many of that support has come from people out of state. So we're supporting sometimes even out of the country. We're in places like Puerto Rico. So people have to, like you said, travel from Texas all the way to California just to have abortion care. That's very expensive. That's very inconvenient. But if we can support people in having access in their own communities, that would make a lot of difference. So it's really great that organizations like you and collectives like yours are supporting them financially, but also we need politicians to create laws so that they are allowed to exist and that they're not being closed down for like legality reasons. So So thank you for sharing that. Another thing that, before I transition to my next question, I wanted to ask you about Beats for Our Bodies. Is there any work that you're looking into getting into soon that we could support you with, or any new programs or projects that
That's
are
a
on the
great
horizon?
question. We actually just did a sort of restructuring of our, I don't want to say business model, because I don't even know if I'm using that
It
term
is a
appropriately.
business model. You're a business.
But like keeping kind of aligned with the way that we really just want to like show up in community as best as we can as full-time students. Like there's no way that we want to like remove ourselves from being an organization because our schedules or because of our workloads. And so we've kind of decided to transition into a store, like more of a storefront or in-person vendor. So we'll be doing a lot of local vendor fairs. So if you hear about those, please come out, please support, especially those in the Decatur area. But certainly following us on Instagram at beads, the number 4, our bodies, and like spreading our mission, spreading our organization around, and also suggesting places that have been like a great resource for you, or like a place that is dear to your heart, a cause that's dear to your heart that you think should be supported. We are always like trying to stay up to date on places to add to our resource list to donate to, and definitely like holding ourselves accountable to that. So yeah, suggesting places that y'all would love to see funded, or just supported by us in any way. And if you have some jewelry designs that you want to see, also hit us up.
I was gonna ask, is it just you and Jill that design the jewelry?
We are a 2-person team, and sophomore year we had tried to expand our team, but we had to like make the hard decision to realize like you have to be in a place to where you can lead people if you want to invite people into your team. And if you just don't have the capacity to like lead well, we decided that we shouldn't be leading. We had invited someone onto our team as like our like social media coordinator and kind of like communications person, but it got to a point where we were like, we can't even like offer the support that we know we want to you in this role. And so yeah, if we're not compensating you, and if we're not, I know like compensation for you too is really important. Like if we're not compensating you, or if we're not like offering this like leadership and like being a team, then even though it would be helpful, like we shouldn't be like putting that on someone else.
That's good that you're very self-aware and that y'all had that moment of introspection. I have a very strong belief in paying people for things, and I actually had an intern who actually just graduated from Spelman, Anaya Baines, and I thought if I have someone on the team, I actually had a few people. I had like 4 people on the team at one point. I don't know how I did that, but I was like, if I add all these people, like I have to do less work. Like it's gonna like lighten my load, but it like requires labor and like work to support them and being the best that they can be. And like I was like, okay, it might be easy for me to just do it all by myself. But if you have the capacity or you have the means or the resources to outsource things, or to like, even if you're doing schoolwork and you can, or doing a school project and you can work with other people outside of like a business framework, I definitely recommend you do that. We shouldn't be holding all of this work by ourselves, especially as Black women. I know we're like, oh, I'll just do it all by myself. I can do it myself. If you need support and you can have that support, definitely have that support. But I also just love working with other like younger Black women in like an internship aspect, because my latest intern, who's still with me right now, Cameron Jackson at Tulane, was able to present at the Black Feminist Futures Conference and do like, she had a press pass and she was doing interviews and content for TikTok and stuff. And so it was so fun being able to be somewhat of a mentor to her and have her go out and go to a conference and talk about Black feminism and be with other people and network. And seen her connect with some of my friends I didn't even know was going to be there, and them sending me selfies. So I think for me, as part of my like professional development, it was really important and impactful for me to like invest in someone else that way, because so many people have invested in me, and I take so much like pride and appreciation for that. And so just to do that in like a fraction of a way meant a lot. But also, you're still an undergrad, I'm not an undergrad, so it makes sense that you got to take a step back. But the fact that you even were pursuing that at such a young age while you're doing so many other things, I feel like speaks to, you know, just what you're going to do in the world as you have more capacity and more time.
Thank you.
So shout out to you and Jill. Speaking of mentorship and supporting people, I wanted to ask you, since we're here and Karis is supporting us, Agnes Scott is supporting me being out here, I wanted to ask you kind of the impact of the Karis bookstore and Artricia and ER, and how they've kind of made this a place as an incubator for young activists and Black people, and activists in general coming together and just doing collective learning and collective work together.
I'm still kind of uncovering the history, like how far back CARES's history goes. But my introduction to CARES, as I became an Agnes Scott student, I was like mesmerized. I just thought there was so much history and texture and richness, and like I think back to how like there are like varying degrees of censorship in activist movements, like just based on what spaces you can get access to, or like who can support you, or like what kind of funding you can get. And I just think for CARES to like have continued to be a place where like hosting book talks, the CARES Circle does something like every week.
They're having another event right after this.
Like it's
Multiple times a
amazing.
day.
It's amazing. And I think like just that labor of love to connect people, like to disseminate this information, to like let people know that there are people who are doing this work already, and like that you can learn from and you can engage with. One, just continues to inform like the way that I want to collaborate with people, like as a person, in my schoolwork, or like networking with people. You know, networking is a huge thing, but like knowing CARES has made networking also feel less icky, because like that's how things happen. That's how like beautiful relationships and like beautiful movements start. But also like that sort of framework definitely informed the decisions that Jill and I have made with Beats for Our Bodies, because like I had mentioned, we wanted to be a social justice education platform. But when we realized like timing and things, I don't know if that's where we want to put our effort, if that's where we feel most home. But two, we know that there are a number of organizations out there that are already doing this fabulous work to dedicate the time to educate folks, to put out these resources and put out these toolkits. And it would be a disservice or like a detraction to kind of be new and step into the space and say that we want to do the exact same that this long-standing organization has been doing, as opposed to recognizing where we fit in this lineage of work and like love and redirect all the attention that we could garner to that organization in that respect. So like, not to denigrate the way that we could have showed up in that way, but like recognizing that this isn't just on us. Like we don't only have the responsibility to do all of the stuff. There are so many people out there who are doing this, and we can all work together. Like I don't, like you were mentioning individualism, I don't have to feel like I have to take the initiative to like show up in every way in this movement. Instead, I can recognize who else is here and who has been here long before Jill and I, and figure out how we can network, how we can support, how we can direct attention to each other.
Love that answer. I feel like that requires a lot of decentering oneself. And as much as we'd love activism to be like also just altruistic and all that stuff, a lot of it can be like self-centered and like wanting to be the voice in the room, or wanting to be the person at the protest behind the mic. And a lot of times people can get caught up in that and kind of forget what it means to advocate for one's community. And I feel like you and Jill having that moment where you can step back and say, do I need to recreate this thing that's already existing, this system that's working perfectly, just so I can have a space that I can call my own? Or do I step in and support and ask how I can maybe help and like change things, or like maybe they didn't think of this avenue, or as a young person, maybe I can help them reach this demographic instead of like doing this whole other project on your own. So I feel like you and Jill, I'm just like in awe of you all, like being this young, having these thoughts. There's so many people, so many organizations that are created that are doing the exact same things that Black and brown people are already doing in their communities, and taking the credit from them. And it's like, if you, as someone who hasn't been on this earth as long, can acknowledge that that's not the best thing to do, why are these organizations getting all this money to kind of take the credit in the work of Black women and Black people? And that's something that's happened with the reproductive justice movement, and that co-optation of the term by white wealthy people who are saying like, oh, we're reproductive justice advocates, and have no racial analysis to the work they're doing. So I love that you all have that. And another thing you spoke on that I wanted to mention was, you said networking can be kind of icky. And I feel, again, like in this individualistic society that we live in, we see networking as, I'm connecting with this person to have some type of personal gain for myself, for my career. But if you just think of it as community building, like you're networking, and maybe this person is more advanced in their career than you, but you could also support them, and you're just like growing your community and growing the resources you have available to yourselves and to other people. So I think I see Piper in the back. I have a friend that I want to connect Piper with, and so me and Piper talking might not benefit me directly, but it can benefit my friend who's more established in their career. It could also benefit Piper. So just like growing that community is what we're doing. You don't have to feel icky about
Right.
networking because you could support someone else that you meet later on
Yeah,
anyways. So
totally.
I just wanted to name that. So
And
shout out to you again.
I also want to thank you for bringing up that, like, there is a sort of, like, I didn't realize that what was kind of influencing the choice of wanting to take a step back, or like trying to do some deep work and to figure out how Jill and I fit in, was actually really rooted in this recognition of co-optation and like the devaluing of the work that Black and brown people have been doing way before other people come in. I didn't, like, that was the thing, that was the driving reason, but I didn't name that. So thank you for naming that for me.
Of course. Another thing that I wanted another thing that I wanted to talk about, what you mentioned with Beats for Our Bodies, and wanting to kind of stay local, was, I'm sure y'all all know that Atlanta has basically become the home of the reproductive justice movement. There's so many reproductive justice organizations out here, a lot of people who are moving the movement forward. You have Sister Song, you have CARES, you have Feminist Women's Health Center, ARC Southeast. I'm trying to name the ones I could think of, Sister Love. There's so many organizations out here that are really pushing this movement forward. And so I wanted to ask you, is there any, like, does it feel special doing work specifically in this city and in this area? And do you feel like a connection to being so close to the movement?
Yes, and yes. I think what made Beats for Our Bodies such an obvious way to tap into this work was because that we were in Decatur, and because we had kind of seen all of these organizations that are doing work, and because we knew that policy changes that were going to undermine reproductive justice efforts were going to attack these standing institutions in our city. And I think we really felt this, I don't know how to, like, this connection to these organizations that are here and have been here, and like, because we can call like them neighbors, and like we live in the same home now, like it felt so important to make sure that they stayed. It felt so important to make sure that these places could continue to be here. So, and I think as I continue to like grow in my feminism journey and grow in my reproductive justice journey, it is also wonderful to know that like I can reach out to anyone here and like just see what happens. I can intern at Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies. I can intern at like Sister Song, Sister Love, or like literally just ask them, can you explain what HB so-and-so means to me? And they will.
And they love doing that.
Yes.
They love bringing new people into the movement. That's amazing. I love it. Every time I come to the Atlanta area, I'm just like, wow, like I'm at the place where it's really happening. Like I feel like it starts here and it like expands throughout the US. We're really in the South, but centered in the Atlanta area. So it feels, especially as someone who's from Texas and is now living in California, it just feels, I don't know, so like rooted down in the South, and especially here. So, oh, I feel chills.
Yeah, so true. So true.
I'm sorry, I'm fighting this mic. So we've heard all the things that you're doing. You're interning at Justice for Black Girls. You're an entrepreneur, Beats for Our Bodies. You're also a student. How do you manage all of this, being a college activist, being a scholar, being all these things?
It is very difficult. And I think it has caused me to do a lot of thinking about like what kind of activism I want to do, what kind of activist I want to be, and like how I want to show up. And I remember we were kind of talking, like being a college student has made me really, really think about the type of activism that I want. And I will say I don't think there's a way that I can make this sound nice. It did make, like, the decisions that I had to think through kind of felt like scaling down. Like I wanted to be in front of the Capitol, walking down Georgia State Boulevard or whatever all the time. And I was like, that one doesn't really work for my schedule. Two, I don't know if that's what feels like the most home to me. And that was a hard thing to think through, because it felt like a bad activist. Like to be a bad activist was to mean that you weren't down with a sign and with a megaphone. But I think thinking back to like the way that we like fit into this larger ecosystem or landscape of social justice, like, and also like my ongoing Black feminist education, that there is no one type of Black girl, there's no one type of Black feminism, like there is no one type of activist. And so whether I'm going downtown or not, like I can still do something else. And there doesn't have to be that sort of paralysis that makes me think because I'm not there, like I can't do anything. Or because I'm not there, like I don't deserve to be posting about this, or I don't deserve to be talking about this at the lunch table because I didn't go. And that was very difficult for me to make that decision, but it was a good one for me. And I also think I worked with the Georgia Youth Justice Coalition last semester, and I was a youth lobbyist at the state capitol. And like working in the policy space, I realized too how much strategy goes into it, and like there are a lot different avenues for strategic action elsewhere. And I think that was a sort of affirming process for me too, to think if I don't do this, that's okay. Like if I don't go protest, or like, I don't know, if I don't call someone, that's fine, because I can also find out this other strategic action to take. And it felt hard too, because like living in the South and living in Georgia, where like marches were happening, like it felt like I wasn't like living up to the legacy or living up to the call. But it's about like figuring out how I can best use my skills and how I can best serve.
Definitely. Have you found a method that works best for you and that feels authentic?
I think talking has always been something that has felt most like home to me. So I like to do a lot of discussion with friends. And I think also if we think about like the ways that the products that academia puts out, like the research and the briefs, like that most of the time that stays in academic circles, because we're not disseminating that to the public.
And the paywall to access research
and the
articles.
paywall. Oh my gosh, yes. And so kind of bringing that to Evan's dining hall discussions feels like one of the pathways to really like de-academize. I just made that up. De-academize knowledge. So that feels really like home to me. And I still haven't found a good one though. Like I was literally just reflecting maybe 2 days ago on like my involvement in the Stop Cop City movement, because I really wanted to do like some canvassing over the summer, but my summer got away from me, and I was like, I just don't know. I would really be devastated if like this project, if this happens and I just want to show up and I don't know how. And then I was like, okay, Kennedi, they tell you can call people. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that gives me so much anxiety. But then I was like, and I was like, also, what if the person on the phone is mean to me? And I didn't want to face that rejection, but I'm making the decision now. I'm like, literally, I don't have to get a good reception from the person on the other side of the phone, and I probably won't. Like that is the reality. But to know that I can be persistent, and like they can hate me, but if they remember my voice, if they remember that I kept calling, and like if it happens that Cop City doesn't get built because of that, like, oh my gosh, that's what we want, or that's what I want. And so
I hope that's what we all want.
So kind of like it's a lot of talking back to this like internal voice, this like internal opposition that I feel, this mode of social acceptability in terms of like the type of activist that I am, but also like, oh, politicians are scary. Like, yes, they are. And yes, this will be difficult. And yes, this is hard. That doesn't really change what I want to do though. You know, I think this is such a long answer. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I think like I had been feeling like there was something wrong with me for being scared to call someone or being scared to like go up to a politician. But taking a step back and realizing like, oh, that is true. Now what? Like, now what? My answer doesn't change. Like, I still want to do the thing. So let me not gaslight myself into thinking that there's some, like, I am deficient in some way and a bad activist in some way. And I shouldn't step into this space because I'm afraid or because I don't have that confidence. I cannot have that confidence and still do the thing. And I might even appreciate my work a little bit more for that.
Definitely. And having the anxiety about calling people, that's just like personality based. Like some people want to get out there and be in front of the mic and talk to people, and some people don't. And I was sharing this at the talk yesterday. I feel like we think of activism and we think of the people who are at the protest behind the mic and really galvanizing people. But in order for people to come out to a protest and care about an issue enough to be at the protest to listen to someone, they need that political education that could happen at Evans through conversations with you, right? So they need to know why this issue matters, why it relates to them. And people aren't typically learning that at the protest. At the protest, we're making demands, we're galvanizing people, we're showing solidarity with each other, but that learning happens in smaller communities. And we need people like you, meet the talkers, to educate people, to have these conversations, and to like build that collective knowledge together, so that when they see issues happening and they see demonstrations happening, they're like, oh, I want to go to this because I had this conversation and I know why it's so important. So now let me go show up. Now let me go to the Capitol and let me go protest to the politicians because I had that learning. So I think we think of activism as this one thing, but it's that thing, what I just talked about to you, and then so many other things. Oh my gosh, so many other things as well. An example I love to give is with the Black Panther movement and how we think of, MLK, we think about Malcolm X and everybody at the protest and being in front of the microphone, but also people providing food for the children and having those food programs and the education programs, like those are really important too. And we don't know those people's names and we don't know those faces, but they did really impactful work and they were activists, and they're just not remembered. But that doesn't mean that they weren't activists. There was also like some misogynoir in there and some other things of why we don't typically know those names. But activism is so wide. And I don't want people to think that if they're not the center of attention, that they're not an activist. And a lot of people who are the center of attention in the movements aren't there for the right reasons. So I don't want anyone to be discouraged from being an activist or identifying as an activist just because they're not, out in front of everyone. Also, some people have social anxiety and maybe they have a stutter. Maybe they don't want to talk in front of people. That's okay. You can still be an activist. So I love that you're finding a way to, or you're finding your position in the movement and how you want to show up, because you are needed in the movement, and it may not be in these other ways that people expect you to show up, but it's how you show up for the movement and for people. And you also mentioned social acceptability, and I want to push back on that, because if this stuff was socially acceptable, we wouldn't have to be advocating and talking and have these things. So if there's people who aren't accepting you, that's probably fine. That's encouragement for you to do it more, because
Literally,
we need to get people to accept it so that we can change the culture and change the policies and change people's material lives. So
Thank you for affirming that.
I love the long answers because I was like, I want to talk about this. So it was perfectly fine. I want to ask you, sorry, I love the long answer, but then I was like, okay, wait, I forgot where I was going. So you talked about college activism. How has it been managing, being an activist and managing all the other things in your life as well?
I think, I don't know.
Yeah,
for better or for worse, it just happens. And I know that's probably also not an informative answer either, but it just happens. It feels, to be candid, it feels oftentimes a lot like I'm not doing what I want to be doing. Like I'm not where I want to be. It feels a lot like lagging, not hitting these marks that I kind of set for myself, especially with Beats for Our Bodies. But I still think it's important. I'm not upset about it enough to where I think I should step away entirely. I think I value what I can give, and I just think what can happen as a result of that is I'm really attached to the outcome still. And so whether it's as much as I want to be doing or not, I try to do it as much as I can.
I asked that question because you are doing a lot, and I know it's very common for people to burn themselves out and overextend themselves, especially as young Black women, and feeling like we have to prove ourselves and prove our worth. And so I just want to encourage you to take breaks as you need, and also just remembering that we're doing this work for longevity and not just doing as much as possible in a short amount of time, but how are we building sustainability in this movement? And we can only be sustainable if we're taking care of ourselves and if we're pacing ourselves, taking pieces at a time. And that's why it's so important for as activists, as organizers, to build a community. So when you're going through whatever you're going through, life is still happening, sickness is still happening, school's still happening. When you have to take a step back and prioritize yourself, you're in a community of people who can pick that up. And so when they need a break also, you're there and you can pick that up. So that's why it's so important for us to do this work, not in silos, not by ourselves. I'm the lone activist and I'm educating everybody on social media and I'm at the protest by myself. No, build a community around you, because then you're doing that political education, right? They're going back to their communities and their families and they're sharing that political education, and then also y'all can support each other and show up for each other, because again, we're doing this for collective liberation. So if it's all individualistic and I'm doing all the stuff by myself, who am I liberating? Well, who's the collective that I'm liberating, right? And we should be working together to liberate ourselves and not oh, I'm this person, I'm liberating everyone else because like I'm better than them, or I'm more advanced than them, or I'm just like this God-given person that's come to save everybody. No, we're fighting for our own liberation. And so I really like for people to like see it from that point of view, and also just to remind you that it's okay to take breaks for yourself. And I feel like you know that, but sometimes it's good to like hear it because we be forgetting sometimes. It's like, oh yeah, I do deserve a break. The world is crashing and burning, but I also deserve to prioritize myself and prioritize joy. And so I feel like it's really good to hear that, because I know when I was at your age, I was like, everything has to happen. I was angry as hell, y'all. I was so angry with the world. I was like, everything has to happen now. And years later, I'm seeing more issues arise, issues develop, and they become worse. And it's like, it's never going to just, unfortunately, all end, but we're just working to get it better each day to a point where hopefully soon, at some point, we'll be liberated.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
Of course. Thank you for being here with me. That was my final question. Can we give a round of applause for Kennedi? He's so brilliant. Thank you so much for all the work that you do. Thank you all for showing up here. Before y'all move, I want to save some time for any questions from the audience. Also, I would love to get a picture with y'all before you leave, so don't escape yet. But before the picture, I'll save some space to see if anybody has any questions or any comments or anything you'd like to share. And I think, ER, you want to do mics? Okay.
Oh, can we?
And then also say your name, please. Your name and pronouns, if you're comfortable.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Kennedi, and my pronouns are she, her. Yeah. So I wanted to ask basically what like the majority of the second half of the conversation was about what type of activist you want to be or what type of activism you want to be a part of. I also like identify as an activist, but I don't think I'd be the type to be like in front of people or like going to protest daily. And then you also talked about how much you're involved with the research, like community-based research, like qualitative. So I wanted to ask, how do you define yourself as an activist, but working more in like that research aspect, or more so talking to people behind the scenes rather than like being in front? And how would you like prescribe that to people who are trying to figure out what they want to do as a young person?
Mm-hmm. Could you repeat the second part of your question?
So like, how would you kind of give advice to people who want to be a part of activism, but are more behind the scenes researcher type people?
Mm-hmm. I think if you want to be a researcher, like the research that you do, the people that you talk to, the places that you go, the methods that you use, like all of that can be aligned with the values of the movement that you also see people like kind of more vocal in. So like I'm taking principles of epidemiology right now, and we're talking about like epidemiological study designs, and like everyone knows you should have a representative sample if you want like good results or whatever. But what does it mean to be representative? Like, how are you sampling people, and like are you matching across age? Are you matching across race? Like socioeconomic status? And like I think those are the things that we kind of think of most immediately. But also like, what about like, I don't know, what about like religion? What about like access to a car? What about like the place in which you live? What about like family style? And to think of all of those other factors that could influence the results of your research is to like be aligned with like to be aligned with intersectional research methods, to be aligned with this understanding that like, oh no, there are these other systematic factors that can influence this person's livelihood and that can influence this person's life ways, and I want to account for that. So I think if we're talking like literal research, totally like the way that you conduct your research can be aligned with the values and like the frameworks of a movement or with like of a theory. But I think beyond research, I know that you do art, so I know like if you create, like your creation is at once like a product of your experience, but also can like see other people in that. It can see other experiences and it can talk to those too. And I think that is really important. I mean, to have something that lives on visually that can speak to so many people, that's activism for sure. I don't know if that answered your question. Okay.
Thank you.
But you're an artist?
Yeah, I like to do mixed media-based work, and I like to combine qualitative research with it to like interview people data and then putting that into artwork.
That is activism. Artivism is activism. Yeah.
Mhm.